Jesseth of Jailshead, Book 1, Bloodkin, by Taffy Ashford, me. Chapter 5. When I woke, I was utterly disorientated. I hadn't managed to close my curtains properly before falling into bed, and sunlight was streaming in the windows. I rolled over with a groan and tried to block out the light and go back to sleep. The enormity of the previous day's events and the realization that we were finally here roused me from drowsiness. I pulled the curtains and gasped a little as the full splendour of Lil was lit by broad daylight. Our hall was right on the south edge of the Neathi Quarter. Laid out in front of me was a jumble of human-style buildings, and beyond them glittered the lake. I opened a window and fresh air flooded in, along with the sounds of the city. People shouting and laughing, dogs barking, and the faint sound of the waves washing on the lake shore. When I stuck my head out the window and craned to the left, I could just see the castle, huge and majestic, perched atop its island. Out my right window I could see the edge of the quarter and the expanse of the city, trailing down to the docks in the west. Even from this distance I could see the activity. Fishing boats that looked like toys were being swarmed over by tiny figures bringing in the catch. It would seem that not everyone in the city had the luxury of a weekend. The sun was high up in the sky, and I realized I must have slept through most of the morning. As if on cue, my belly rumbled, and I began to get ready to go find some breakfast. I pulled on my cleanest clothes, though they were still a bit travel-stained and grubby. Clearly I would have to find the laundry. I wondered if I had enough coin to buy some new clothes, perhaps something a bit more fashionable for my new city life. An image of Salah's perfect face flashed to my mind. Yes, well, looking good certainly would be a help with the ladies. She hadn't seemed that impressed with my appearance last night. Out in our living room I found Charlie surrounded by half-empty boxes, humming happily to himself. "Jazz, you're up! Oh, kid, I thought you were going to sleep forever." "You could have woken me," I replied grumpily, picking my way through the chaos to the bathroom to relieve myself. When I came back in, Charlie was standing proudly in front of the fireplace, already swept and set again, ready for the evening. "Here, I got you some breakfast. How about I go and grab us some coffee?" Without waiting for a reply, he bounded out of the room, and I could hear his footsteps thumping faintly on the stairs as he made his way up to the kitchen. There was a plate of pastries on the side table, which I greedily devoured, belatedly hoping Charlie hadn't wanted any. He returned, holding a big pitcher of coffee and 2 mugs, which he poured for us both, handing me one before sitting, cradling his steaming drink. "Look, all my stuff has arrived. I had it sent straight from Fortesta when I knew I was coming here, but I didn't expect it to arrive so soon." "Yeah, cool," I muttered, still half asleep. Charlie laughed and drained his mug freakishly quickly. The coffee was still boiling hot. "Oh, I have to show you these." He bounced up and retrieved 2 small flat items from one of the boxes. "My most treasured possessions," he said proudly, removing their brown paper wrapping and offering them for my inspection. They were 2 watercolour paintings, framed in gilt. One was a delicate landscape of Lil, I realised, looking over the lake towards the city from the direction we had entered yesterday. It was minutely detailed, the washes of colour giving it a dreamlike yet familiar feeling, reflected patches of sun on the lake seeming almost to glimmer. I gasped when I noticed the signature. "Ashlew, seriously? This must be worth a fortune." Charlie grinned and nodded, and I handed it back to him to scrutinise the other painting. It was a portrait of an attractive Neathi woman. Unused to Neathi measures of beauty, I could still tell that she was remarkably handsome. Her grey skin was slightly green in hue, and her eyes, huge even by Neathi standards, were so red as to be almost violet. Her long white hair was coiled gracefully, and her generous lips were slightly curved, as if she had been caught enjoying some private joke. The tiny signature in the bottom right-hand corner was the same. Ashlew, 583. "Gosh, Charlie, she's pretty. Who is she?" I looked up to see Charlie blushing slightly. "She was a good friend of mine. She was very kind to me when I was first here as a journeyman. Oh, yeah. I was disbelieving. Charlie would hardly have had Ashley paint a portrait of a mere friend. Oh, yes, well, consider it a young man's crush on a beautiful older woman. He sighed wistfully, and I raised my eyebrows at him. Oh, nothing happened. Nothing like that. Yeah, sure. How on earth did you manage to get hold of these? Ashley was the most famous artist of our time, renowned throughout the country. For the past 20-odd years, he had held the contract for painting the portraits of candidates at election time, but a private commission would cost a ridiculously huge amount of money. Charlie chuckled. They were payment for some help I gave him. Really? That must have been some help. Yeah. You do end up doing some very odd jobs when you're a journeyman, for sure. I helped him with some, difficult customers. You magicked them. Oh, Jazz. Always so suspicious. I hardly had to use my Hjaven at all. I'm very good with humans, you know. That's why I became a mentor. Oh. I had never considered why Charlie had chosen this particular career. So what's he like then, this famous artist? Charlie hooted. Mad as a hatter. Like all genius types, I suppose. That's why he needed my help. Not much in the way of social skills. Hold up, I'll just hang this one here. He moved over to the fireplace and lined up a round black blob on the back of the landscape with a similar one on the wall. He closed his eyes in concentration for a second, then pulled his hands away. The painting remained fixed to the wall. Your, Hjaven? Indeed. Handy stuff, this magic business, eh? He took the portrait from me. This one's going in my room. He grinned sheepishly and disappeared into his bedroom to hang the painting. I finished my coffee and poured another from the pitcher, then went to examine the half-full bookshelves. Most of the books appeared to be in Neathi, judging by the strange gilded lettering on the bound leather spines, but there were a few in the human language. One particularly hefty tome was a dictionary, but there were volumes of human history, along with psychology textbooks written by human doctors. Oh! Exclaimed Charlie, re-entering the room. I'll unpack the rest of those later. There's some you might find interesting. There's even some romantic novels, he said with a wink. Though I doubt you'll have much time for pleasure reading. I've got a list here from the Academy of the texts you'll need. He fished in a pocket of his robe and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. I groaned. The list contained the titles of about 20 texts that I had to buy. The purse of coins my father had given me was generous, to be sure, but if I had to buy clothes as well... Don't worry, Jazz. Textbooks are definitely classed as essentials for the Bloodkin, so the Academy will purchase them for you. It's rather a wealthy institution, you know. Oh, that's good then. I was thinking perhaps I would need some new clothes and stuff. Most of mine are a bit wrecked from the ride. Yes, my clothes had certainly suffered from hours on horseback, especially in the seat department. But curiously, Charlie's black robes hadn't even a light covering of dust. I remembered I had noticed this when we first met, and I commented on it now. Neathi weave, my friend. Imbued with all sorts of Hjaven to ward off the dirt and the like. I've never been much interested in the more domestic applications of the craft, so I really have no idea how they do it. He paused, frowning at his robes. I mean, I can see what they've done, but how? He grinned. I guess that's why I'm not a weaver. Of course, Jazz, we'll get you some new clothes. I'm pretty sure they come under essentials too. We should get you some robes as well. It'll mark you as Neathi blood. Handy in a big city. Gosh, robes could be cool. They looked comfortable and warm. Winters at home were reasonably mild, and it hardly ever snowed, but Lil was considerably further north than Gel's Head, and warmth would be good. Not that I could ever imagine the hall getting chilly, what with the number of fires I had already seen burning in the place, and I assumed the Academy itself would be similar, with the Neathi's strong dislike of cold. Still, I reckoned I would cut rather a dashing figure in proper robes, and I bet girls would simply love a man who could do magic. Alright, JJ, ready to go? I grabbed my coin purse, just in case, and followed Charlie out of our rooms and down the hallway. It was quiet up here. Everybody else must have had a head start on us. Down in the reception, Eve gave us a friendly wave and confirmed it. All the others are out and about already. You two had a good sleep-in. Are you settling in all right, Joseph? She fixed me with her great orangey eyes. Oh, yes, thank you, Mineve. Everything is most comfortable. She chuckled and nodded at me. That's excellent. Oh, and before I forget, your horses have been taken to the common ostlery out past the docks. They will be well looked after there and get plenty of exercise, don't you worry. If you need them, just let me know and I'll send a journeyman down to fetch them for you. Useful creatures, these journeymen. Hardly seems 10 years since you were one yourself, Kayosh. Now, be back by dark, you two. Seeing as everyone is in residence now, I thought we'd have a bit of a dinner party. That sounds marvellous. Thank you, Yevgenia. We'll see you tonight. Charlie grinned at her and he led me out through the massive front doors and into the daylight. The Niathi quarter by day was quite different to how it had seemed last night. The lane to the hall door was narrow and quiet. I had been right about the shading the colourful fabric canopies provided. Light filtered down gently, and although the late summer morning was getting hot, it was balmy and comfortable down on the street. The lane twisted away from the hall, and the quiet was abruptly gone. We found ourselves on a corner, and the weekend crowds were out in full leisurely force. It must have been more of a main street, but it was still narrow. Niathi in groups and pairs wandered slowly, enjoying the day. There were also plenty of humans here too, conspicuous in their human-style dress. Just like mine, I thought. Doorways everywhere were open, and ground floor windows were unshuttered and thrown wide. I could see into the gently glowing interiors. Many were private dwellings, obviously, but their occupants, seated on plump couches or around dining tables, could see it out onto the street, calling out greetings to passing acquaintances. We turned onto a lane that led away from the lake, and through gaps in the canopies I could see the hills ahead of us, stretching away on either side, covered with grand mansions glinting in the morning sun. Down here in the quarter, however, all the buildings were made of the curious black stone that seemed to gather up the light. On a corner slightly more open to the sky, a cafe of sorts was open. Delicious smells were wafting out the windows, and chairs and tables were set up under sun umbrellas on the generous pavement outside. Groups of human and Niathi sat sipping coffees and sharing moss pipes. The lane we turned down had a number of shops along its length, signs outside their doors marking the trades they were plying. We passed leather workers and weavers, a shop that sold furniture, and an intriguing apothecary whose shelves of jewel-coloured potions glowed invitingly. Further down we came to a tailor and Charlie led me inside. Racks of Niathi-style robes hung in rows down one end, bolts of fabric were stacked neatly on the far wall, and couches were set up under the windows that were open to the street. To my surprise, a middle-aged human woman appeared from a door behind the counter as she heard us come in. She waved us over. "Good day, young sirs, and what may I help you with today?" "Oh, Charlie, I heard you were back, and this is your Bloodkin. Congratulations, boy." I wasn't sure whether this was aimed at Charlie or myself, but he reached over the counter to clasp her hand in greeting. "Min Tadiella, good to see you. Is business well?" She laughed, a merry, tinkling sound. "As well as can be expected with a city the way it is. But look at you. The years underground have done you well. Look how you've filled out. Used to be such a scrawny wee thing." Almost without pausing for breath, Min Tadiella turned to me. "So it is your first time in Little Boy?" Yes. Indeed it is. I'm Jesseth of Jailshead." "Jailshead, eh? Good wine from Jailshead. Oh, yes. But a bit provincial, no?" Yes, you definitely need some new outfits as befitting a young Niathi blood." She eyed me critically. "So, what'll it be? You'll be wanting some robes, of course." She came out from behind the counter and circled round behind me. "Good gracious me, it looks like you've spent a week in the saddle. The seat of these have almost worn clean through." I squeaked in a most unmanly fashion as she reached out and grabbed at my pants. "Now, just let me fetch a measuring tape." And she disappeared back through the door behind the counter. I gave Charlie a questioning look. "Surely this behaviour wasn't normal." Charlie leaned in and whispered in my ear. She's the best tailor in Lil. She's Neathi blood, you know. Right, now Jesseth, stand up straight. Tardiella had returned, brandishing a measuring tape. She slung it around my shoulders, waist and hips, then measured the length of my arms and legs, getting terrifyingly close to my crotch before she had me stand up against a wall pinned with a height chart. 6'1", eh? You're a big boy. Far too skinny, of course, but if I know old Eve down at the hall, she'll be doing her best to fatten you up. Min Tardiella noted down my measurements at the counter, then went over to one of the racks of robes. Now, you'll need something for everyday wear, for now and for when it gets a bit cooler. Although I have noticed how our big grey friends tend to overheat their dwellings. She pulled out 2 robes from the rack. I think these will be best. The first was pale cream linen, light and airy. The other was of a finely woven wool, a darker golden shade. These will do nicely for now, I think. Now, you'll be wanting something a bit more formal for special occasions. What with the Queen coming at midwinter, I'm sure there'll be plenty of festivities to dress up for. She beckoned me over to the far end of the shop, where bolts of fabric were arranged. Go ahead, choose one. The bolts were arranged by colour, and I immediately dismissed the pinks and the purples. I fingered some of the blue ones. There was a nice heavy cotton, the colour of the sky, but then maybe that wasn't formal enough. I have to admit that I don't really care all that much about clothes, but if there were going to be festivities, especially festivities that involved the Queen, I suppose I'd better look nice. Min Tardiella looked on patiently as I examined a bright cobalt linen, but I figured it probably wouldn't be warm enough for evening gatherings. A dark teal blue caught my eye. The colour was deep and rich, almost greenish. I pulled the bolt out to look more closely, and Min Tardiella nodded, looking pleased. Lovely alpaca that, from down your way, in fact. Neathi woven, of course, to guard against most spillage. She held a corner up to my face and grinned. Oh, yes, really brings out your eyes. Lovely, lovely. I felt the soft fabric. Yes, this would definitely do for royal occasions. Now, how about some nice trim? She pulled open a drawer full of spools of trimming and gestured for me to choose. One immediately caught my eye. It was a narrow band of royal blue, bordered with purple and gold thread, with stylized emerald vine leaves curling down the middle. Oh, yes! Most fitting for a jail's head boy, no? Tardiella gathered up the cloth and the spool of ribbon, placed them on the counter. Right, so am I correct in thinking I am to bill the Academy for these purchases? She smiled innocently at Charlie. Yes, please, Min Tardiella, that would be most kind. She nodded and wrote briefly in the large ledger on the counter. Jesseth, dear, may I make a suggestion? Your current attire really is almost obscene. She hooted with laughter. Perhaps you should try on one of your new robes now. I'm sure you've got an afternoon of shopping ahead of you, and I can't have you scandalizing the quarter. I fidgeted, feeling the back of my pants. Surely they weren't that bad. Then my fingers discovered a hole, dangerously close to the inseam, and I decided that changing into a robe now probably was a good idea. Min Tardiella handed me the cream linen robe and led me to a corner tucked in beside the fabrics. She pulled a curtain on rails to give me some privacy, and I stripped off my clothes in front of the full-length mirror. Pulling the robe over my head, I struggled with the hood and the arms for a second, managed to secure the belt at my waist, then regarded my reflection. The colour certainly suited the sandiness of my hair, but there was more than that. I looked different. I turned to the side, pulling the hood up. I looked elegant, sort of graceful, and undeniably cool. Having fun in there? Charlie called out. Embarrassed, I gathered up my old clothes and pulled the curtain open. Charlie whistled through his teeth and Min Tardiella clapped her hands in approval. Would you look at that? A real Neathi blood. Well, Jesseth, if you leave these with me, I'll fix them up for you. You never know when you need human-style clothes. For writing, perhaps. She chuckled and held out her hands for my bundle of clothes, placing them on the counter beside the bolt of fabric and trim. The wool robe she folded and placed in a brown paper carry-bag. Take this with you now, and I'll have the other things done and sent up to you at the hall. Thank you kindly, Min Tardiella. You have been most helpful, Charlie said, grasping her hands warmly. You are most welcome, my dear boys. She walked us to the shop door. Oh, and Jesseth, welcome to Lil. Out in the street, I felt much more confident. In my old clothes, I felt like I'd stuck out like a sore thumb, but now, in my new Niathi robes, I fitted right in. I liked the feel of the linen as it draped about my legs as we drifted up the lanes in the slow flow of the traffic. Most of the humans ignored us, intent on their own shopping missions, but many of the Niathi looked at us with friendly smiles. Every now and again, someone would recognize Charlie and come over to us, shaking his hands or clapping him on the shoulders with words of congratulations and welcome. Charlie introduced me proudly, but I was quickly overwhelmed by the sea of odd names. Charlotte, Agatha, Eugene. The subtle differences in their colouring indicated the enclave they were from. The slightly bluish-tinged skin and ruby-red eyes marked some as being from Charlie's own VO, but there were many others who Charlie must have known from his time in Little as a journeyman. As it was, we made slow progress through the streets as they twisted up and away from the lake, and without Charlie there I would have been hopelessly lost. At one intersection I happened to look up. A building on one corner was only 2 stories high, and on the roof I could see a shaded garden. Stone air bridges ran over the road, connecting the garden with other buildings, and I realized that there were many such walkways hung over the streets, festooned with shade cloths 3, 4, even 5 stories high in the air. I heard bubbles of laughter from the garden, and Charlie pointed to the sign that hung by the ground floor door. That's the Shivering Thistle, best pub in the quarter. We might be going there later, depending on what time Yevgena kicks us out of the hall. He paused and looked for a moment like he wanted to go in, but shook his head and hurried me past and down the lane. Not much further along we found the great bookshop, its huge freestanding shelves strongly lit. Charlie pulled out the list of texts I needed to buy, and I groaned inwardly at having to find the 20 books it required in the cavernous space. But Charlie simply beckoned over an assistant, a very young-looking Niathi girl, clearly a journeyman. He gave her the list along with our names, and she promised to package them up and have them sent to me at the hall. We then went to the shop next door, similar to the booksellers but on a much smaller scale. Charlie helped me pick out a couple of journals, their empty pages ruled with lines for taking notes. Then he steered me to the glass-topped cabinet set into the counter so I could choose a Niathi-crafted pen. The shopkeeper, a severe elderly human gentleman of few words, slid open the back of the counter and pulled out a display case so we could take a closer look. Niathi pens are highly unusual. Long implements of delicately wrought metals or wood that encased a glass tube for holding ink that would flow through the nib when pressed to a page. They were beautifully designed instruments, far more efficient than using a quill. I chose one that was long and hefty, the silver letters of a more masculine design than most of the others. The shopkeeper lifted it from the display case for me to hold. Near the nib it had a grip of polished pale wood that was a comfortable circumference for my big fingers. Satisfied, I chose a bottle of dark blue ink, and the shopkeeper showed me how to fill the pen before tightly closing the lid and packing the bottle and the pen into a wooden box and wrapping them and the journal in paper. He grumbled quietly about bloody students when Charlie requested he charge the hall for the expenses, but nevertheless took my name and handed the package over, which I placed carefully in the carrier bag with my other new robe. Out on the street again, Charlie shielded his eyes and looked around. I think we could do with some refreshments, yes? Actually, yes. That sounded like a great idea. My light breakfast of pastries had been hours ago now, and although I was hardly overheating in my new robe, I was thirsty as anything and my feet were starting to hurt. I was thinking perhaps I should get Charlie to help me find a cobbler at some stage to get some new boots fitted. My last pair had been made for me more than 6 months ago, and although I could hardly believe it, they were starting to feel a bit tight. My feet were already like big paddles, and I rather hoped they had stopped growing. But visiting a cobbler would have to wait for another day. I had already done quite enough shopping. Yeah, I'd die for some food. Righto then, let's head back to that nice cafe. And Charlie was off, pulling me through the streets back down to the lake. End of chapter 5. Yay! Woo! Cool! There we go.